So, on to how flawed the geography of the United States is. Now, since I'm in my very early days of YouTube, I can't afford all these fancy cameras and anything, but you should still tune in because there are a lot of facts in this video. So, still continue to watch. And I said new educational videos coming out January 1st, 2020. By then, I will try my very hardest to have actual high quality videos. I'm going to try to make a video every day. That's not going to work. There are going to be days where I'm not going to be able to make any videos. I understand, but yeah, let's just yeet right into it. So the first has to do with the East Coast. Jacksonville, Florida is the westernmost city on the East Coast because when they define how far Florida should go, they actually used it as where the Atlantic coast stops going northwest and turns northeast. So Miami, the easternmost part of Florida, is actually further east than Charleston, South Carolina. And you'd end up in a small city that ends up with a G on the South Carolinian coast. However, if you go due north from Jacksonville, you'd end up in Cleveland, Ohio. The easternmost point of Georgia is Savannah. Savannah is actually a little bit interesting because Georgia is the state on the East Coast that is the easternmost point. You'd end up, if you continue to go north, you'd end up right by the Pennsylvania-Ohio border, which, if you know, is really far west. If you've ever been on Interstate 79, you know how far west it is, especially Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania goes 5 degrees of longitude west, which is indeed nearly 350 miles. Like, if you've ever been on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, you know that without traffic, it's a 6-hour drive. And since you're avoiding Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania, you might get lucky enough to have that happen to you. Like, Virginia goes further west than West Virginia. And it leads into eastern Ohio. Pensacola is the westernmost city in Florida, and it goes so far west, it's pretty much due south of the city of Chicago, which, if you didn't know, is in Illinois. From New York City, it's a 13-hour drive along I-95 into I-80. Then you actually get off on I-94 on Veterans Day. Veterans Day is tomorrow. Today is November 10th. Anyway, the geography of New York, not New York, but the geography of the East Coast goes inwards. But then you have another syndrome. Virginia Beach is right by the coast. And if you go due north, you'd end up in Ithaca, New York, famous for the 1903 pandemic of typhoid fever. And Ocean City, Maryland, and the easternmost points of Delaware, notably Lewis, are actually around that same point. But the thing is, basically no one lives here and no one drives through here. I-95 doesn't, for example. I-95 between Savannah and DC takes a more inland route, which skips by the Hampton Roads. If you've ever been to Virginia Beach, you know you should go down the Virginia Beach Peninsula. But if you're going to Williamsburg, you actually don't. Even though the two are right next to each other, there are major difficulties. If you head up the Virginia Beach Peninsula, you go to Ocean City, Maryland, and then into Virginia. Now, here's where the difficulty arises. People do drive through Delaware. I just have to blur this and point it to the ground so that they don't Anyway, now that we're out of there, so DC is 220 kilometers or 140 miles away from the coast. That's a 2.5-hour drive on US 50, which passes really close to the southwestern corner of Delaware. But most likely, if you're going to DC and you want to avoid Interstate 95 traffic, you recommend it to take US 301, slightly farther south in Delaware, to US 50 into DC. You're not supposed to go down all the way into Delaware, then go on to Route 454 right by the southern border with Maryland. So usually when you're going through, you go through the northern portion of the state of Delaware. That's what you're supposed to do. Washington, D.C., if you go due north, you'd end up in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, part of the Cumberland Valley between Carlisle and Harrisburg. I-81 actually goes through the Cumberland Valley. So if you've ever been on Interstate 81 in Pennsylvania, you know what I'm talking about. But basically, if you go farther north, you'd end up near, I want to say Binghamton, but even Binghamton's wrong. It's going to be somewhere around Rochester, Syracuse, I'm really not sure. And I can't check my maps because then it would interfere with the YouTube video that you're watching. And since we're already so far in, I can't redo all of this. I promise it'll be more professional on January 1st, 2020, when real YouTube videos are coming out. So, still subscribe because I need help, but yeah. So, anyway, even places like Baltimore, if you go due north on Interstate 83, on I-83, you'd still end up in the area around Harrisburg, the capital, which despite being in southeastern Pennsylvania, if you go due north, you'd still end up slightly west of Binghamton. But then you have New Jersey, which actually goes surprisingly far south, farther south than Kentucky's northernmost point, in Cape May, where US 9 hops on a ferry into the southern part of Delaware. Then you have the New Jersey Turnpike heading through the west. Then you have New York, which despite being a coastal city, I-87 goes into the upstate portions because then the coast starts to switch. Now, what I-95 should in reality do is, if it wants to be a true coastal highway, what it should do is that it should actually go into Richmond, through Kings, then up, and then to Connecticut and Rhode Island. And then, yeah, that's basically about it. that was an interesting video talking about how far west the East Coast can get. But the West Coast is even more interesting because Los Angeles, if you go all the way north, you'd end up on the border between Washington and Idaho. It's farther west than Carson City, the capital city of Nevada, as well as the capital of California, Oregon, and Washington, as well as, Juneau, Alaska, and Honolulu, Hawaii. But that's like already known. Everyone knows that. That's not in the lower 48. But Los Angeles is directly on the coast. If you know how big Texas is, you'll know that a third of I-10 is located there. The 1/3 and 2/3 markers. Because El Paso is closer to Angeles than it is to Houston. Furthermore, if you look at it on I-10, Santa Monica, which is a suburb of LA, is closer to El Paso than El Paso is to Orange on the other side of the state. Furthermore, Orange, Texas is closer to Jacksonville than it is to El Paso. If you've ever been there, it goes to exit 881. It's the highest exit post. Texarkana is closer to Chicago than El Paso, which notably is where Interstate 49 ends on its second out of 4 segments. Yeah. So if you go due north from San Diego, you'd actually end up in a wildlife refugee thing in northern Montana. Montana. Damn. Montana. Which, is quite interesting. But because it's the California slant, which means that despite I-10 going from coast to coast, it's shorter than I-40 because the coast goes in those directions. The and I-90 are much longer. Although I-80 technically doesn't go to the coast because while it goes in New Jersey, like I-95, it could probably end in Westchester and still be pretty much on the coast. But if it wanted to, it could go all the way to Cape Cod where US 6 ends and not run into many difficulties. So, if you're wondering, I-75 begins in Miami and then it goes western Florida. It barely even goes anything west, and you still end up in central Michigan if you're counting for the Lower Peninsula, and it actually goes so far north it can go into the upper. So it's kind of long. So, yeah, that's how the U.S. basically looks. Well, that's U.S. geography. Anyway, I know this was a long video, so bye. Soon we'll get sponsors. I sponsor this, but we're just in the beginning stage. This is my 3rd video. It's not going to be in super high quality, but it's still going to have a lot of educational facts.